I'm Russ Kickle, and today we have a special episode of American Reef where we're going to talk about photographing our coral reef aquarium. So why do I say this episode is special? For two reasons actually. First of which, it is by far the longest episode I have ever released. It's probably going to come in at about an hour and 20 minutes, which means you better have an hour and 20 minutes to watch this or plan on doing it via multiple sittings. Second of all, we're not actually talking about keeping things alive, but we're talking about photographing those things that we've been trying to keep alive. And we're going to do that by interviewing a professional photographer. His name is Jeff Lloyd, and he is the owner of So Many Roads Photography. Luckily for us, Jeff is also a reef keeper. So he kind of knows those trials and tribulations that we got to go through when we try to take a photograph of something that just doesn't stay still. Now, Jeff is going to do this in kind of like 2 to 3 segments, or sections maybe is a better way of defining it. The first section is hardware-based, right? Or cameras, lenses, things of that nature. And he'll go over everything from SLRs to DSLRs to the various lenses, you know, and kind of what all those definitions mean and, you know, what you want to look for. Now in there are some tips that he gives us where there's a section where he talks about this really high-end kind of lenses and cameras and things of that nature. And basically he talks about how we can get access and use this equipment without investing that tens of thousands of our own dollars to actually keep them in our permanent possession, so to speak. So again, it's really cool as far as some of the tips that he does provide, and there's probably something in there from the novice to the pro. The next section kind of bleeds together with kind of how he sets up the pictures as well as kind of the settings that he uses, and you can start with a baseline and kind of adjust them accordingly. And again, I really believe that there are tons of information in this video, which is why I kind of kept it as long as it is, and I really do believe that there's something to be had for everybody. Now, you've heard me talk over the past several weeks about wanting to help small businesses, right? And this is a good example of what I mean. Now, when we shot this video, it wasn't the intent, but you know, it's still a good example of what I mean by trying to help small businesses. You know, like after 3-ish kind of weeks after watching this video, right, tens of thousands of people will hear about Jeff Lloyd and about So Many Roads Photography, right? And so when you look at it, it's just a forum, and it's my way of kind of helping that small business get some international exposure. So with that being said, let's kind of spit up that interview, and at the same time, if you are looking for American Reef's HPD, you can head on over to AmericanReefHPD.com.
Again, thanks for spending the time today, Jeff. You know, what our goal today is for us newbies to figure out how we can take some photography, right, or some decent photography, you know, of our aquariums. And now you've been doing this for a while. How long have you been a photographer?
I've been doing pictures since '99, and I really got in right when the digital photography, you know, kind of really took shape. And before that, you know, I had like other, you know, film cameras, but the real love began when it was like digital, you know, when you're able to basically see whatever the image that you're taking right then and there, or, you know, actually using it in your computer. But yeah, ever since then it's been, I think photography might be more the reef hobby, if that's possible.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, So the average reef hobbyist spends $3,000 to $5,000 within the first 2 to 3 years of owning a reef tank. Now, as far as a photographer, within the first 4 years, what kind of spend can we anticipate there?
I would say the first year you're definitely going to spend $1,800, like just getting your foot in the door. But it's a good one. And like I said before, like buying lenses and having them in your bag, they'll never get old. They'll never get broken. You know, as long as you take care of them, they never go out of style. Like the connection, the mount point, it never changes. So, you know, I can have a lens that's a couple years old, and I know it's going to be good a few years from now. So the only thing that I'll be upgrading would be the body, you know, this part, and which is great. So, as a photographer getting in, you know, spend a decent amount of money if you can afford it on your body. It's going to come usually with a kit lens, and a kit lens means you get the body and a lens, and then work your way up. Just, you know, if it's possible and it's feasible for you, save your money and buy good lenses. That's another, you know, key thing I should tell you. Like Canon and Nikon, they have different lens lineups. You know, they have ones that you can find for $200 at your local computer store, you know, and they go all the way up to the L series, which these are, like an L series lens. And what it means is it's thick glass. It's weather sealed, real thick rubber. This lens probably weighs about like 1.5 pounds. You know, even though it doesn't look like it, it's very, very heavy. But it's weather sealed, it's dust proof. So what I'm trying to say is all of this will last for years to come as long as you take care of it, you know. And the great part is you could just keep adding on your lens library and then just change your body.
So it's a lot like the reef keeping hobby, right? In other words, the reason why we're doing these videos is so whatever you do purchase, you know, you're going to make an intelligent decision and purchase something that it's not going to be disposable, but you're going to add to it and you're going to keep it. So with that being said, our goal today, we're going to do some tips and tricks for the new guy, right? To go over how to take some good photography. Yeah,
we're gonna show you how to use your existing camera, or maybe even a new one, or even rent one, to get in front of your aquarium, take some awesome pictures to share with your friends and family, and then learn some tips and tricks along the way. And we'll show you what to do and what not to do when you're taking pictures.
Well, I'm very good for the what not to do, right? So I'll make sure to chime up.
That's all right, everybody is.
But to me, it's learning, right? How do you know, right, what you do wrong unless you do it wrong?
We're here to have fun.
Okay, so let's take a step back. So I'm a new guy, and you know, I got this tank. I don't know much about photography, right? Mm-hmm. And what I heard you say so far is, okay, there are many tools of the trade, be it lenses, etc. However, there's not just one tool, right, for taking pictures, right? So let's try to break it down to, if you're a new guy into it, what's the easiest kind of? Can you take your point and click camera and get good pictures with it?
You can.
Okay.
Yeah, if you had a point and click camera, you could like there's multiple settings on your point and click camera. Some of them, you know, you'll have the guy running fast. You know, you'll have the green square. You know, then you'll have the flower, and then you'll have usually like a P setting or a manual. You kind of want to stay in the manual setting, and what I mean by that is when you switch to the manual mode, that will allow you to adjust your aperture, which is basically the depth of, you know, what you're seeing. So if you have a smaller aperture, like most cameras, like high-end cameras go as low as like 1.2 aperture, and that's like the minimum amount of light it takes to get into the lens. So just as a sidetrack, as a wedding photographer, he wants a real small aperture, like a 1.2 in a wedding, because it's very dark in, say, a church. Now if you're outside in the sunlight, you could bring it all the way up to like 19, and then basically everything is in picture. So if like I was looking at, you know, this device, or this piece of plastic right here, and it was like a 1.2 aperture, you would only kind of see like a faint circle of quality, and the rest would be blurry. And that's what a lot of people are like, oh, how'd you take that picture with that blurriness in the background? And that's your aperture. So that's one setting that in the hobby we have to, you know, keep an eye on. And the other one is shutter speed. Shutter speed is the time it takes for the shutter to open and close. So when you're taking a picture, the light goes through the lens, through the aperture, and then it opens and closes, and that's the shutter speed. So how quick that opens and closes when it captures the image. And when the shutter opens and closes, the quicker it closes, the darker it will be. The slower that the shutter speed will slow, it will be brighter. Now, when you're looking at your aquarium and you're trying to take a picture, what I usually like to do is be on the manual setting, like I said before, and I usually start at like 1/60th of a second. So what that means is it's like a good ballpark to start at. Now, another tip for a new photographer trying to take pictures of their aquarium, what you could do is, if you're looking at your camera, your point and shoot, or you know, if you have like a DSLR, you could go up to it and set it to the P for shutter priority, snap a picture, and see what it looks like. And then what you could do is, when you take a look at your picture, it might be too bright, it might be too dark. What you could do is look at the info on that picture. So like if you on your camera you have an info button, or even if you take it over to your computer and you look at the image, it will tell you the aperture and the shutter speed. And what you could do is kind of go in the manual setting at that time and bump it up, bump it down. You know, work with both of those adjustments, and that way you know you're getting what you're seeing. You know, so when you walk up to your aquarium or, you know, your tank, and you look at it, you're like, I know I'm seeing more purple, I know I'm seeing more light, it should be, you know, a little bit brighter. Some of those features you could take care of post-processing, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But other things, you just know when you look at your tank, it should be brighter, it should be darker, or you should be able to see this specific pink or purple, or the fish should look a little bit different. And what I'm trying to get at is, that's when you're switching to the manual mode and you're adjusting your shutter speed and your aperture. And that way you can kind of you know, what you're looking at. Also, it's important that you know, when you do some like post-processing and you're showing your friend your pretty coral, that you don't like put too much color or too much vibrance in it, because they're gonna say, wow, that looks great, and here you're like photoshopping the picture, you know. And no one likes a Photoshop piece of coral or a fish, because then it really takes away from, you know, it's almost like if you Photoshop all of your fish and all of your coral, and then your friends came over and looked at your tank, and they looked at you and just said, you know what, you're full of it.
Right.
You know, we know what you're up to.
Right. Okay, so I'm new. I've got aperture. I've got shutter speed. Mm-hmm. And you said you can actually take, and if you use that little P button, right, mm-hmm, you take a picture and look at it and say, and do an info. That way you can figure out what the aperture and shutter speed are, right?
Right.
And you're saying if it is darker and you like to make it lighter, what would you change? Would you change the shutter speed at that point?
I would change the shutter speed. You know, with the aperture, you can keep it like kind of low, probably in the ballpark of like 2.0, and then work your way up to maybe 5.6. That's usually a standard lens. So if you buy like a box set of a camera, like a Canon or a Nikon, especially in like the SLRs, like when you first connect your lens and your camera, and you're on the P for shutter priority, and you just tap the button once, you know, just to basically, when you hit it once, you're saying like, give me the information, give me the light, what you're seeing coming through the camera, and you'll see that the aperture is probably 5.6. You know, if you have a real expensive lens, like, you know, something like this, like these are, you see them all the time at like football games and stuff like that. This is a 7200, and it's an f4. So the lowest this lens can go is f4. Okay, And like this guy right here, this is f4 as well.
Okay, so
describe
that. Describe that for me.
The macro.
Meaning, what are your ranges? If you're talking aperture.
For aperture, like we'll just use the big one because everyone has seen this one before. This one, the lowest it can go, I'm sorry, this is the 2.8 model. So the lowest it goes 2.8, the highest it can go is 20. You know, no one usually shoots in like 20. Like when you buy a lens like this, you're looking to go the lowest it can because that's where like the sweet spot is. You know, as like a portrait photographer myself, I like the lower end stuff because if I were to take a picture of you, like the back of your wall, your fish tank, you know, your pictures, your computer would be all blurred out, nice and soft, you know, and that's what most people like for a picture, you know. Yeah, so that's that lens.
Okay, so then, to your point, the better of the lens, the smaller the aperture you will have.
Yep. Yep.
And then, so for a reef tank, again, if you're taking it, you're saying if you reduce that aperture down, you'll get that blurry background, so you're kind of focusing in.
Right. So if you kind of had, like, as an example, you had a clownfish, you know, right in front of an anemone, okay? And the anemone was in the back, and you were doing like f2.0, you would get like most of the clown. He would be in real sharp focus, look beautiful, and then like the green bubble tip anemone in the back would be subdued, you know, it would be blurred out. And as you dial it up, say like 5 or 6, you know, or even higher than that, it's going to be, everything is going to be in focus. You'll start seeing the bubble tip come out, you know what I mean? It almost opens the picture up, you know, wider, so you can see all of the detail, you know. But
okay, so that makes perfect sense. So in other words, for focal area, you're talking aperture, right? For lightness or darkness, you're talking shutter speed.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And so the two settings that you said you should start off on if you're, you know, kind of a rookie like me, it would be how much?
Shutter priority.
Okay, and so shutter priority, and then what would the speed be again?
I would start at like 1/60th of a second. So if you're looking at your display, you know, it would be right up here. It would say 160. Okay, it's not going to say, maybe on the Nikons it says 160, but 160 is where you want to go, and then you can dial it in. If you're looking at your camera, there's you know, there's multiple options in here, and another one would be ISO, and that's necessarily the artificial light that you're giving, like the camera to, you know, with aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. It's like a formula of like really what you're looking for. In ISO, you probably want to start off at like 400. It's in 100 stages. So most good cameras can do 100, 200, all the way up to 128,000. And like back to like the wedding photography example, you like when you get in like the like the 64,000 ISO, that's when you start getting a little pixelization, noise on a picture, you know, and that's what differentiates good cameras versus bad cameras. They're able to go up to that higher level and not have noise in the picture, you know. So when you look at reviews on cameras on the internet, you know, they usually work the ISO from as low as it goes, as high as it goes, you know, and they'll do side-by-side samples. So in our situation, we have pretty good lights above us, you know, so we don't really need to necessarily give the camera artificial light. So what we can do is kind of leave that on the lower end and work our way up. It's really all, you know, it's, you know, when you look at your tank, you're setting out for a picture, you have something in your head, you're like, I want to capture this, and that's what you need to kind of home in on. You know what your tank looks like. You know, you just have to kind of take your time and look at the screen, adjust the settings, take another picture, adjust it, and then when you kind of get close, you know you're there, then that's when you can bring it into applications and start tweaking with the color a little bit, the light, the exposure, you know, contrast, you know, things of that nature.
Okay, so now we've opened up some more goodies, right?
Yeah.
In other words, you had mentioned color, contrast.
Yep.
Okay, what kind of settings are we talking about that affect, let's say, color first of all?
Well, that's a good question. You know, another feature of your camera that you have to keep in mind, and a lot of people, you know, it's kind of funny, but my mom, you know, and my mother-in-law, when they take pictures and they show me them, they're always blue. They're outside and the picture's blue. I'm like, how did you get a picture be blue? Well, what that is the white balance. And the white balance is the color tone of the picture. So, as an example, if you were outside, you would want to use the daylight white balance. You know, if you were in like fluorescent lighting, you would want to use fluorescent lighting. Now, with shooting inside your tank, that's when it kind of gets a little bit tricky. You're going to have to like adjust it a little bit. Whenever you're taking pictures anywhere, I don't care if you're inside a ballroom, if you're outside, it's a cloudy day, if you're in a train, you always want to take pictures on the daylight setting. You know, that was a tip that I learned years ago from another photographer, because the daylight setting is really easy to play with at that point. So if you take a picture, I take one right now, just me sitting here on the daylight setting, it might come out a little bit blue and it might come out a little bit yellow, but I know I'm in between there is where I can change my color. You know what I'm saying? The same goes with your tank. When you're on the daylight setting and you take a picture, and especially if you have your blue lights on, everything is going to kind of look it's going to look white and blue, like really kind of washed out. And which kind of brings me to my next point. When you're doing pictures, you want to have your blue light off. You just want the whites on, because it's just much more easier to control the color. Because when you take the picture in the daylight setting with the blues off, you really do get what you're seeing inside of your tank. And then when you bring them into software and you post-process it, usually you only need to add a little bit of blue or a little bit of yellow in the color tone. Like every piece of software on the computer, if it's Mac or Windows, has these features. You know, you might find it underneath like the advanced toolbar or whatever, but you'll see them. It's white balance, exposure, contrast, saturation. You know, then it gets into like newer software, vibrance, all different stuff like that. And those are all tools there to help you tweak the image to what you're really trying to, you know, represent what you're taking. And
Sure.
all my photos that I'll show you, that we're going to show to all the viewers, I don't necessarily like doctor the photos. The only thing that I really do is just make sure the color tone is right, because I don't want to send a picture that is like too much yellow, because then it would, you know, defeat the purpose. So
That makes a lot of sense, right? And I guess, so to your point, if you like the light, if you're shooting it in a daylight setting, right,
mm-hmm.
you can pull the blue out, or you can add it if you want to make it representative. But if the blue's in there, it's hard to take it out. Is that a true statement?
Yep.
Okay.
Say you're outside, it's a real warm day, and you're shooting the daylight picture, you know, or daylight white balance, and you'll come back in and you'll look at the picture, and it will look like there's too much yellow. Just think of if you're standing in a cornfield, you know, there's just too much yellow, and what you could do with, you know, your pictures is just add a little bit of blue, and then it will, you know, bring in that more natural color. And the same goes when you're shooting inside your tank.
So you mentioned something. You said, hey, if you go outside, it's a real warm day. When you say warm, I'm assuming you're saying the color is warm, right? Or are you? Okay.
Yeah, the color yellow.
Okay, so that's what I was getting at. So, in like the camera lingo or whatever you want to call it, when it's warm, it's yellowish, and if it's cold, it's blue.
Blue, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So there's actually a lot of software out there, add-on tools where you can like selectively make stuff warmer or cooler. You know, in our situation, we kind of want to make it a little bit warmer. You know, because even though we have the white lights they still look blue when you take a picture of them, you know, because it's that tint in them. But yeah, to answer your question, that's what I mean, warmer, cooler.
Okay, perfect. So, as far as taking pictures and adjusting the camera, so what I heard so far was for color, right, there's white balance, and to take the actual blues in your light and get them off, right?
Yep, take them off.
Take them off. Is there anything else that we can do to kind of adjust the color from a camera perspective other than white balance?
Well, that's where it gets real tricky. Like when you bring a photo into, let's just say I'm just going to use Lightroom, Adobe Lightroom. That's what I use. But just say any application. That's where saturation comes in. Saturation is how. I always think of someone that has sunburn. You know, if you take a slider of saturation and you bring it real dull, they look like they're pale. If you bring it real high, it looks like they're just got out of like a suntan. You know, they're getting a suntan because they're real crispy. They're red, orange. You know, and that's like a real good tool to use when you're post-processing your pictures of your fish. You know, you don't want to go overboard because then it gets into the area of your friends saying, yeah, you know, what you just took is not the real thing. I'm staring at your tank and that color is not there, you know. But saturation is one of the tools that you would use. White balance and saturation, you know.
Okay, so then on the camera, it's white balance, and then on your post-processing, saturation.
Yep, saturation. And when you're post-processing, I'm sorry, the white balance is there. You know, you get the scale from yellow to blue and then pink to green. So it's you know, two levers that you can move back and forth. You know, you usually don't do anything with yellow, or excuse me, green and pink. You know, the cameras do a pretty good job of that. It's just the yellow and blue.
Okay, so there's a couple things that you pointed out which is really good. So first of all, if you want to take good pictures, you have two components. You have the camera portion, and then you have the post-processing portion, which is done on your computer.
Yep.
So two key components there. On the camera, you adjust your white balance. Again, white and blue are the numbers or the colors you're going to take care of. And then post-processing wise, then that's where you can use the saturation to pull out more realistic colors of, you know, whatever the subject is then.
Correct.
Okay, good deal. And then anything else on the camera end of it that you would adjust for your colors?
No, other than that should be about it. Probably the next section to talk about would be how you should be, how can I explain it? How you should position yourself when you're taking a picture. Because as you know, when you look in your tank, you know, it's like a mirror. You can look at it at certain angles and see the way you know, reflections happen off the sides of the glass. And what I mean by that is, like, what you want to do is you want to be straight on into the glass. You want to try and stay away from the tipping. You know what I mean? Like if you tip towards the glass, you're not going to get good results as if you are straight on. So, you know, you have to kind of work your tank from side to side, you know, and up and down, but you have to stay level. You don't want to tip it at all. You know, a lot of people that I've talked to, when they're shooting coral, they'll turn off their pumps and actually take it, you know, straight down, which is it's a cool way to look at it, but you kind of have to shut down your system. You have to move your lights around a little bit, and then it becomes, you know, very difficult. I never really got into that. I always got into, you know, straight on into the glass, because otherwise, if you kind of tip this way, and you'll see, you can you know, mess around with this. Take some pictures on the side, you know, like that, and like up and down, and then after, when you're post-processing your images, you'll see that the results are not going to be that good, especially with your lights being on above you, and you get at a certain angle, you're going to get lens flare, and lens flare is basically direct light getting into into the lens, and it's going to obstruct the picture. So always go straight on. And if you're working on something on the side of your tank, make sure you're on the side.
Now, can you actually take the lens and smash it up against the tank itself?
You could. If you have, it's a good question. If you have a lens hood, like this is a smaller one that I'm taking off right now, you probably see it that way. But as that lens hood, you could put that right against the glass. I wouldn't recommend, if you didn't have a lens hood, putting it right against the glass. What's going to happen is, especially if your camera or your lens is in autofocus mode, it's going to be the motor in it is going to be kind of going in and out, in and out, in and out. It's going to have a real hard time focusing on what you're trying to achieve. So if you actually come out maybe like 2 or 3 inches, that would be even better, because then you give yourself some space to focus in on what you're trying to obtain. Sometimes I usually do both. I usually do manual focus and automatic focus. Because like I said, when I take pictures in front of my tank, I kind of pull a chair up and I enjoy it. I take my time with it, and I always mess around. I always will try some obscure setting on the camera to see what the results are. And most of the times, the shot that you think isn't the good one usually is the good one. Especially when you're doing it with moving objects, because like I said before, sometimes you have fish that they're your buddies, and they know when you're in front of the glass, and they get excited because they know you're going to feed them, and they think they're being fed, and they'll kind of my point is, you're trying to take a picture of something, and it'll keep popping in front of you, and when you're taking a picture, you might get a real good shot of that fish or coral. Well, the coral will be moving, but you know what I mean.
Right.
So yeah, so mess around.
Okay, so flat, right? So we know we want flat. We're going to go vertical and horizontal, but flat is the key.
Yep.
Don't necessarily, if you have a cover, you can put it on there, but keep a little bit away.
Yep.
As far as like you had talked about earlier, like with a monopod or a tripod, you should always have one of those no matter what as well when you're going side to side, or
not necessarily.
No.
Like I said before, it gets a little bit cumbersome, especially if you're trying to capture the fish moving. If you're on a tripod, you're kind of it's in between your legs, and you're moving it, and you're kind of plopping it, and so that gets a little cumbersome. So you don't necessarily need it. But like a tip to photographers that do have SLRs, in my opinion, I like to hold the lens on the hood. Because if you're holding it back here, you're kind of, as you can see, I'm kind of like all jumbled up, and I have big hands. So like I like to hold it right there, and then kind of give it like a counterweight. So I'm being stable on the body of the camera as well as on the lens. And especially when you have like a big lens like this, like, not that I would use this here, but you would hold it like that, and on the body. It's just much easier.
It makes a lot of sense, right?
Actually, I have used this.
Really?
Yeah, you can use this lens. What you could do with it is go in the back of the room. Like, say your tank is in your living room, and this is an excellent shot to have like a full tank. That's when you would use like this is a zoom lens, the telephoto zoom lens. So that's when you would use that. But otherwise, you're going to just stick with your standard lenses, macro.
Okay.
Speaking of lenses, here's a good tip for someone that has like like a good SLR body. You can go on the internet, and you can go to rent glass or borrow glass, and you can rent these lenses for like $30 a week, and they come in prepaid mailers. So essentially, they come to your house. The lens is in a pack. You use it for a week, and then you put it back in the mailer, and then you ship it back. It's great. Everyone does it. Like wedding photographers, you can rent necessarily a $2,000 lens, borrow it for a week for a low amount of money, get awesome pictures, and send it back. And then maybe in 6 months, do it again.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. What in your mind? Okay, what kind of lenses are we going to look for out there? I mean, knowing that we like color, right, and we like all that detail stuff.
I would definitely say macro all the way. I mean, macro is so fun. For anyone that has ever done macro photography, which is basically you getting like this far away from a subject, you know, taking a picture of a flower, you know, seeing all those crazy details or seeing a little bug on there that you never saw before. Macro would be number one. Canon has multiple macro lenses, and when you go to these sites, they're all sorted out for you. You know, telephoto, macro, prime. A prime means like this lens is prime. It only goes 105 millimeters. So that's what prime means. It's one focus length, like 50 millimeter prime. That's all it does. So yeah, I would definitely say macro. And then your standard zoom lenses would also be a big benefit. So I would just stay in those two ballparks.
And does
you can get some great deals out there for lenses. And the great part about it is if you're like an amateur photographer or even you're kind of really getting into photography, it's a great way to stock up your bag and find out what you like, what you're good at. You know, you can understand. It's almost like if you go out and you rent a car, you know, for a week, and you really like it, well, then you can go buy it because you tried it out. And it's the same goes with lenses, you know. So
and so now, what were the two websites again?
Rentglass.com.
Okay.
And Borrow Lenses.
Okay. Perfect. So,
and if you're in a major city, you can actually contact most of your camera shops, and they all have walk-in, you know, rentals. Like I was just recently in Atlanta, Georgia, and there was multiple places there, camera shops that you can go in, and you can give them, you know, deposit, and they were really good about that. You usually just give them a check, like a blank check, you know, just written out to them, I should say, and that just covers damage in case, you know, you broke it, you lost it. Of course, you're going to buy it, just like, you know, everything else. But it's great. You'd be able, if you're in a major city, you can walk in, rent a lens, go home, take pictures of your tank, maybe go out, take some pictures of other stuff, and then bring the lens back. And then you look like a superhero to your friends, and they saw your pictures.
Okay, now, so do they have the same thing for the camera bodies, or no?
Yep, yeah, same thing. You can go out and rent a $10,000 Canon for $500 or less for like 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about like football grade, guy on the sideline type cameras, you know, like the big boys.
Okay, so if you were the hobbyist, again, somebody new, what camera would you recommend that they start off if they're going to rent one, for example? What like line or, you know, what would they look at?
That's a hard question because it's almost like, do you like black or do you like white? You know, do you like vanilla pudding or chocolate pudding? And that's Canon and Nikon. You know, it all depends what you grew up with. You know, what your friends have around you, what your parents, you know, maybe had. I have always had Canon. You know, I know their lineup. They're great cameras, and every person, I can only speak for Canon. Every Canon person would probably start off in the Digital Rebel. You know, they have like the T3i, they have other versions, but anything in the Rebel will get you excellent results. You know, when you get into bodies like this one, the 7D, it's faster, which means when you hold down the button, you know, you get a burst of pictures. And then when you get into higher end ones like the 5D Mark II, which is a full frame camera, which means that it's not cropped, it's the whole deal. Perfect for portraits. Now the pictures that I'm going to show you, I did them on both of these cameras. So this one is twice as much as this one, but I also got amazing shots on this camera, and that just goes as well as the Digital Rebel, you know. or even a point and shoot. As long as you take your time and look at what you're doing and know what you're trying to achieve, you'll be able to get it. You know, you don't have to throw money at a problem just to get a good picture.
Perfect. So let's take a second to take a break. That way you can, breathe a little bit, so to speak, and then we'll come back and talk about taking that perfect picture. Okay.
Okay, great.
Sir, so while we were on break, we were talking about kind of how we're going to flow this thing, and let's take 1 second to talk about the different kind of cameras then that we've got out there, and what kind of separates them apart.
So if you were to walk in your local store and look at all the cameras on display, and if you're human like me, you're going to look at the price first, and then you're going to kind of guide your way around features and size, probably. If it's compact, if you can stick in your bag, your purse, or whatever, you have to, wherever you're going. I guess I should say, when you're in the ballpark for a point and shoot camera, you're going to want to look and see how good the sensor is, and the sensor is basically the brain of the camera. A lot of people get hung up on megapixel, it's really just a buzzword, and it's a fab, in my opinion, because you can have a camera. The perfect example would be this Canon 5D has an older sensor than the 7D, but the 5D takes better pictures than the 7D. So that's where it becomes into features, like this one's faster, this one's slower. This one has better quality, this one has a little bit less quality, but they're both amazing cameras. And that's my point, is when you go and you look at point and shoot cameras, you have to look at the features, what it can do. If I were to go out to the store and get a point and shoot camera, probably the biggest feature I would look for on a camera would be its manual setting, because when you get a point and shoot camera, you're going to excel past it probably. Most of us, when we get a new electronic, we figure everything out about it. We go into the nitty-gritty settings and try and exploit it and figure everything we can about it. And the same goes for cameras. So I would want to make sure that I had like a manual setting on my camera, and I was able to change the white balance, the shutter speed, the aperture, and basically really get in there. If I were to, if I were moving past point and shoot cameras and I was getting into, the high-end digital SLR bodies, I would definitely, either look at Canon or Nikon. Since, like I said before, I use the Canon bodies. I would start at the Digital Rebel, and you could definitely get years and years and years of use out of it if you're just an amateur, or if you're just getting in or out of the point and shoot cameras. That being said, usually when you do get the digital Rebels, like when you start at that lower end body, you kind of work your way up to the next level pretty quickly, and that's with every hobby. Just like the hobby that we're in, you're going to excel very quickly and even move on probably to another tank within less than a year, or even 2 years. So you kind of want to build your roadmap and say, what am I going to use my camera for? How much do I have to spend, and what are the features? And that really goes for anything. But
now, are there any differences? I know some of my friends will say the reason why they chose Canon was not for the body so much, but the fact that they're the compatibility with lenses or something like that. Are there pros and cons to each one of those lines?
Well, I would have to say the Nikon bodies look better, and in some cases are on paper, So when you have, like, in comparison, you look at them side by side, the Nikons definitely look more robust. They have, you know, they pack more of a punch, I should say, especially in, like, you know, the new line. But the problem is the lenses on Nikon. They're very expensive, and that's where Canon, you know, goes up a little bit higher than they do. They have, I wouldn't say cheaper lenses, but more affordable lenses for us, you know, as family members or someone that's not getting paid to take pictures. That's a big thing to consider. Like, you don't want to be stuck with an 1855 lens in an amazing professional body, you know. You want to be able to keep adding to your lens kit, which is the great part about getting into digital photography, because the lenses are essentially going to stay the same, and as you get like a good amount of lenses in your bag, you can get a different body, and you have all of those great lenses already, which is great, you know.
Okay, so you kind of reminded me, and we're going to jump just a little bit, like when you had mentioned your point and shoot, right, to look at the sensor, and then you had mentioned that again with your kind of your SLR kind of cameras, right? You had the different bodies. To me, the 2 points or the two questions that I have would be, for the sensor, how do you know what's a good sensor, what's a bad sensor on the point and shoot? And then as far as the bodies on your digital SLRs or your SLRs, what are kind of the progressions? What are good things? What are bad things? Those sort of things.
Well, it's like everything else. You're going to have to do some legwork. You have to read reviews, look at sample photos. With point and shoots, it's kind of a market that I'm not really like into per se. I'm more into like the DSLRs. My suggestion for someone that's just going and buying a camera for the first time would be to read reviews on the internet. Like dpreview.com is a fabulous website where you can go and they have all the lenses, you know, all the bodies, samples, full product review, you know, price comparison. It could be the lowest end camera to the highest end. They really do have a great selection there. Plus they have a great user community where you can go ask questions and people, you know, from amateurs to professional photographers all around the world respond, you know, and it's not too overwhelming. If I'm in the market for a new camera, I usually go there. I'll look at samples, I'll look at prices, side by sides, and they're great because they have they'll have like previews before, you know, bodies come out, and they'll say this is what's different about this new model coming out and why you should be excited. And everybody, that's what we follow. You know, if you're into technology and you know, all things digital, that's what you kind of thrive for. You're always looking for that next model and how you can incorporate it into your life, you know, whatever you do. But that's what I would do if I point and shoot.
And that's DP Review, you said?
Yep, DP Review.
Okay. And then for like your DSLRs, what are the difference in the bodies as far as progressions up the...
For the digital ones, the first and foremost, the big one is the full frame sensor. There's full frame and there's crop, and what that means is, like, you basically have like it's a 35 millimeter sensor. So if you were to, we'll try and do it, you know, if you're looking at that piece of glass in there, so it's kind of like a mirror. That's the whole crop one looks like. See how it's a little bit smaller?
Right.
What that means is it's 1/6. It's usually 20 millimeters. So say if I have this 100 millimeter lens on this crop sensor, it's actually, you can do the math, but it's around 120 millimeters once it's on the sensor. Kind of like pushes it forward a little bit. Now with the full frame, the lens that's on here is a 50 millimeter, and it's just 50 millimeter because it's on a full frame body. If I took this 50 millimeter lens and put it on the Canon 7D, it'd be 70 millimeter. That would be it. So that's a huge consideration. And what it would look like in a picture you could read stuff about this on the internet, but say you took a picture of like a school bus. On the full frame, you would see the whole entire bus, wheels, top, sky, everything. On the crop, you would probably get to the bumpers, you know what I mean? And then it would be kind of smushed. It's fine it's fine that you get a crop sensor, and when you're in like the Digital Rebel, the 40D, the 50D, the 60D, you know, they're crop sensors. But when you, in the 7D is a crop, the 6D is new, that's a full frame, 5D Mark II, full frame, 5D Mark III, full frame, 1D, full frame. And that's where like the professional line starts, okay? So if you're new into the hobby and you're getting into digital, you're going to get a crop lens or a crop body. And, you know, the differences between, you know, the sensors, like I was saying before, how the 5D is older than the 7D, but it's got a better sensor, is because it's a full frame sensor, first of all, and it just has better image quality, but it's slower. So that goes back to like when you're reviewing your camera, you're thinking about one. If you're going to go into like a large computer store, you know, the best thing for you to do is go look and go home. Write stuff down and then go home. Do not buy something just off of a spur, especially cameras. You want to go home and read about them, and you know, maybe it's $500 more for you to take a step up, and it would be well worth it for you to do that instead of, you know, spending say $1,500 when you can spend $400 more and get a completely different camera will, you know, blow it out of the park.
Okay, so then frame size is one thing that's a differentiator between the bodies. It also mentioned like basically the processing power as well, right? Are the different things. Right?
When you get into like some of the sensors, when a lot of people talk about is what we mentioned before. When you get into the ISO range, which is the artificial light coming into the camera, when you get into like the higher end 6400, 128,000, some even go higher than that. When you get into those ranges, you're going to start to see noise on the picture. You know, little pixels everywhere. You know, with software nowadays, you can clean it up pretty well. So you can bring it into, like the application I use, Lightroom. You can bring it in Lightroom and you can remove the noise. You know, if you remove too much of it, everybody's going to look like clay figures. You know, they're just going to look washed out, right? But you want a little bit of that noise in there, so, like I said, you don't look like Gumby. But the differences between the two lenses, or the two bodies, I should say, is how well they do with that low light situation, and that's where it really gets into like price tag. You know, that's a big part of it. The other part is shutter speed. You know, how fast, how many frames you could take in a second. You know, if you're holding down, say you have, like myself, I have a 5-year-old, it's really hard to get her on the go, you know? So if I'm outside with her or at the playground or she's running around having fun, I would probably get the 7D. It's faster. I can hold this button down and it sounds like a machine gun going off, you know? I'll just... See what I mean? Right. See how fast that was? Now, here's the, this is the 7D, or excuse me, the 5D. So it sounds like, you see how it's
Very much so, very much.
And you would think that this camera, like, not any good, but it's definitely a good camera, you know? So shutter speed is definitely a big contender.
To your point, there are many tools for the trade. It's important to understand what you're trying to shoot first, right?
Yep.
So I guess with that should give enough, you know, kind of insight from at least a rookie end like my end. If you're going to go out, what you need to do. But you were also talking about what's really important is not only that tool, but how you kind of frame it up.
Yep.
Right. Describe that a little bit.
So when you're framing up the picture, is basically when you're sticking the camera, you know, in your eye and what you're seeing in the eyepiece. And when I say framing, take for example when you're looking in your tank and you want to get like, this is kind of where it becomes like artistic, you know, like you're
very much. Yes.
This is like, yeah, this is your way to show what you see and what you interpretate. And by framing, say you have a piece of coral, you would have it at the bottom left-hand corner of the eyepiece, you know, of the frame, and then the right, you would have, let's just say, a soft coral. Well, what you want to do is get it framed in right, so what you see is what you want to get. If that makes sense.
No, yeah, very, very much. So.
It's almost like if you were taking a picture of a tree in the middle of a field. Some people would frame that picture with the tree right, excuse me, right in the dead center, and then it would be like a hill in a tree. Other people would move the camera to the left and have the tree over here, you know what I mean? And then the rest of the picture being framed would just be nothing. So what I'm trying to say is you want to frame the picture to like what, you know, you're really after. I'll show you some real good examples where I have a clownfish sleeping in an anemone, and I have him on the right hand side and the left is just like black. I was thinking of like if I was swimming in like a coral reef and that was like the edge of the coral reef where, you know, after that there's nothing, it's just black. And you know, that's kind of what I got. And that's probably one of the cool features to you know, being able to take pictures of your tank, you know, to be able to see the different nooks and crannies and aspects that you might not be able to see once you're like down on your hands and knees looking at the tank, you know. Just one of those things.
And do you have, are there any tricks that you use to kind of point out, oh, this is a really cool frame versus, I'm not, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, is there any things that you can do to kind of get...
Well, like when like for example, if I'm looking at my tank right now and, I don't know, that, like at the bottom, you can't see it, but I have a candy cane coral. It's kind of laying pretty cool, and I can see that it's splitting. So I would probably like shoot that like this, like up and down, like a portrait style. So you can really show that like the one part of the head is on like laying on the sand, and then, you know, up a little higher. The other thing you can do, which is great with digital photography, is take a picture, bring it into your application, and crop it. Meaning, take the image and then just crop out what you don't want and what you do want. Especially if you're taking a picture of like a wide area of your tank, and maybe you don't want this one fish because he's out of focus. What you can do is just crop that one fish that's in focus, you know.
That makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
I guess for me, I've always appreciated like the different looks that you can get of a reef tank by just moving around.
Mm-hmm.
In your reef tank, how can you, or what can you do, right, to make sure that like those looks actually come in good, if that makes sense? In other words, you had said it before, there's stuff moving and everything going wrong, and so where you might see a good picture, it just doesn't come out good photography wise. What kind of...
That's where the patience comes in the chair. Nobody's going to sit down and take one or two pictures and say, yeah, that's the one. It doesn't work that way, especially with all of the moving objects. And, you know, shooting through glass, first of all, is really hard, you know. So that's where patience comes in, you know, taking a lot of shots, taking some time, looking at the display on the back of the screen, saying, you know what, that one looks good, but I'm going to go back in for another, you know, frame it a little bit differently, move a little bit. Maybe, like, if it looks a little bit shaky, turn up the shutter speed a little bit so it's a little bit faster. And then if you take a picture and, excuse me, it looks too dark, maybe bump up the ISO, you know, a little bit. And that's where it all goes back to when we started this conversation, is being in that manual setting and just tweaking out your settings, you know, because you don't know exactly what you're going to get until you really do import it, you know, and say, wow, that looks good. And then what you could do at that time, like we said, is write down the settings and just say, this is the settings I had my lights off or the blues off, and it worked out great, you know. And you can learn a lot from what you already have done and the mistakes that you've already made, you know.
Okay, so just to kind of frame that up, if you were sitting down with your chair and your camera and you're going to take some pictures, how many pictures would you take to get maybe 5-10 good pictures? How many on average?
I usually take like 100 pictures. You know, I'll take 100 pictures and then get like usually like 4 or 5 out of them, you know, depending. And then what I usually do is, like, I'll take some pictures, I'll like play with them inside like the software, see what I can figure out what I like, and then usually take the card out, do some more, put it down, and then, well, that's the great thing about it being in your house, you know what I mean? It's not like you have to, it's there for you always to do it.
Right, makes a lot of sense.
But yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, usually like 100.
Yeah, and again, to me, I think that's important because a lot of people, to your point, and I'm probably the biggest abuser. 1, 2, 3, 10. Man, they suck, right? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You gotta give it some time.
Yeah, you have to learn a lot, and by having, like, you know, decent equipment, it definitely helps. You know, I have to say that if I were like if I had a really nice tank and I was new to, like, I wanted to take pictures, you know, I would probably buy like a good body, you know, because then you can use it for whatever, you know, if you have a purpose other than just taking pictures of your fish tank. If not, maybe ask your friend to borrow one. Maybe you know someone that has a good camera, and then, you know, you can rent lenses and stuff like that. I know a bunch of my friends and I will chip in. We'll get a bunch of lenses for, you know, like 2 weeks, and we'll just, you know, switch them off. Say, here, you take the macro for a couple of days. You take this one, and it's great. Especially if you're going on vacation. I highly recommend it to everyone. If you're going to the beach, or, you know, you're going somewhere to visit family and you want to get good pictures, rent it. Because you know what? You're going to come back and you're going to look like $1,000,000 when you see those pictures. It's well worth it.
Now we're going to talk about, like, some of the challenges, right, of you know, taking some sort of photo of that beautiful reef tank that you've got in a hobby, right?
Yeah, and there's more challenges than anything else. Especially, I think the hardest part, like, capturing good photos of your tank would be, like, not being able to control the lighting, as well as, like, if you have a tank that has the bow in the front, you know, it's like, you know, everyone knows what a bow tank is, but, you know, or maybe scratches in your glass that would be obstructing your view, especially when you're working with macro. 9 times out of 10, the lens is going to focus on the scratch rather than what's inside the tank, you know, because it's that first thing that it can focus on. Other than that, you know, your fish moving around your tank, especially if you have, like, dotty backs and different type of, like, wrasses, they're going to move and you're going to move with them, and sometimes they're not going to sit still. I have in the past fed my tank and take pictures, but I didn't really like the outcome of that because then there was, like, fish food in the frame. You know what I mean? There's like particles everywhere, or like micro bubbles. So I kind of got away from that, and I have had a lot of good success with taking pictures when you first turn off the blues. So it's basically in the morning when you come downstairs, depending on how your lights are set up. Mine come on like usually like 12 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, the whites. I'll usually just knock off the blue, and then that's kind of when everything's kind of opening up a little bit, and the fish are a little bit calmer because they adjusted to, you know, the complete darkness to the light, and that's usually a good time to try and get some pictures.
Micro bubbles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Scratches on glass, right? Do you have any tricks that you can use, like to clean that glass super good that it doesn't screw up for the photography?
I actually kind of prep my glass before I even start taking pictures. I'll usually, like the night before when the lights are off and you don't scare the fish, I'll use like a microfiber cloth, and I usually just do it dry, and I'll just right of like the front of the glass, the surface, because usually my daughter will come downstairs and she'll just plant herself, you know, and there's, you know, like high fives on the glass. So I have to kind of take care of those. And I usually just use a little bit of water. I never use like spray or anything like that, because God forbid you spray it too high and it, you know, goes over. You don't want to do that. But microfiber cloth, kind of get it ready. And then I just have like the floatable, you know, glass cleaner. I use, you know, a couple times. For the scratches, there's not much you're going to be able to do with that. The only thing you could really do is kind of get away from it, you know. My tank upstairs, I used to use it for my daughter at hermit crabs, and it's a square tank. I think it's like 27 gallons. But what I noticed when taking pictures, I got real low to the sand bed, and I was you know trying to take a picture, and I noticed all these scratches all over the glass, around the entire glass. And I come to think about it, and here it was hermit crab shells scratching the glass as they walk. You know, they kind of scratch it ever so gently, but repeat, when they keep going around and around, they're going to make all different type of marks. And so what I had to do was just kind of come up a little bit more, and then I was fine, you know.
Okay, so I can offer you a little advice on the cleaning of the inside of the glass, right? Like when you have those scratches, for example, you know, when you take your, you know, tiger magnet and go over it, you know, it's got basically that Velcro, which gets a good majority of it, but it doesn't get inside the scratches of the glass. If you take like the Mr. Clean Magic eraser, I don't know if you've ever seen those sponges, right? But basically just take that sponge, put it on, and sandwich it in between, right? Your magnets. What it will do is it will actually allow you to get inside the little scratches of your glass, and it'll take all that algae away. So it'll kind of like buff it up just a little bit. And sometimes people don't have strong enough magnets, so what they'll do is they'll take that magic erase mark or whatever it's called, and they'll cut it in half. Just take a piece of scissors, cut it in half, then sandwich it, and then kind of do it that way.
There you go.
So I know on the inside of it, that's one option you can do to kind of keep it clean.
That's a good tip. I will definitely try that.
So now we're gonna have clean glass, front and back. What else? The micro bubbles. Do you just douse everything, right? Do you just shut all your pumps off, or what do you do?
No, I usually don't like to shut my pumps off or anything like that. I usually just, you know, I like to actually see the fish kind of swimming in their pattern, you know, their normal pattern. But if you have some, you know, some real high flow, you could, you know, turn it off and just see what it looks like, you know. But I think the results you'll get with non-moving water, it's going to kind of look a little dull, you know, especially your soft corals. They might just kind of like, you know, stand up straight and kind of like sink a little bit. So you kind of want to see them moving, you know, but it's really up to you, you know, especially if you have soft corals. You kind of want to capture that movement, you know.
Well, that's exactly it. Like we had talked about earlier. To me, that's what makes a fish tank, is that movement one way or the other. So, you know. So since we like the movement, right? what setting on your camera do you have to adjust to make sure that you don't get a blurred movement, but you actually get a freezed frame, 100% kind of, you know, still photo?
That comes in with the shutter speed. If your shutter speed is too slow, you see, when your shutter speed is too slow, you're gonna get more light, but you're gonna get less movement. So you want to make sure that your shutter speed is up high enough, but it's not dark. So that's when it kind of gets into that manual setting where you need to make sure that your camera's set up right, which goes along with like the shutter priority, the P feature. You know, take that quick thing, the quick snap, see what it looks like. If you have any like blur, you know, or maybe it's like too bright, that's when you can switch to manual and kind of dumb it down a little bit. You know, like mobile phones, they do a pretty good job of keeping up with the shutter speed. You know, even out of the box, like I have the iPhone, it does a pretty good job of capturing it, but the white balance is awful. Like, you'll bring it in and everything will look like electric blue to the point where it's not even a good picture. But there is like aftermarket you know, applications that you can use, and we really don't need to get into that because you know how many millions and millions of camera applications there are out there for your phone. But just find one that maybe will have a manual setting or like a quicker shutter speed setting.
Okay, so then shutter speed will control that kind of motion there. You had mentioned about lighting, in other words, fixed lighting above your tank versus kind of something you can move. Explain how you can use that to your benefit.
Yeah. In my situation, I have an LED light setup that's hanging from the wall, so it's, you know, I can move it per se. So even if you had like a friend over or your wife or even one of your kids, you can maybe have them help you kind of tip the light a little bit, and you'll get a different result in your pictures. What I mean by that is, like, you know, your light is just flat down, maybe like tip it towards the glass a little bit or tip it backwards, and you'll get a different effect on your picture, and it might really help your outcome or it might not. And that goes back to it's kind of a silly thing to say, I know, but it goes back to when you have your camera right in front of the glass, and if you're tipped up a little bit, you're going to get lens flare. Well, you're really introducing lens flare by tipping the light towards you. So, you know, that's why I said you kind of have to play with it, you know. And as we said before, you know, you usually take about 100 pictures to get a couple good ones, but when you do, it's well worth it. You know?
Very much so. Do you have a favorite shot, we'll say, with the tank? You know, I've seen, for example, that clown in the anemone. What kind of things, since you have the trained eye, right? You were talking about framing, for example. What do you look for when you see other people's kind of photography of their tanks?
I look at expressions on like, I like taking pictures of coral, I really do, but I really like taking pictures of fish, and I like the expression on the fish's face, you know. And you do get that by, you know, by taking a lot of shots at once. You know, there's a lot of fish like gobies, you know, like a dotty back, you know, even clownfish. You know how you can just kind of look at them and it just seems like they're looking at you, like they're like eye to eye with you and they're understanding, you know, like, who's this guy? But it's those moments that I really try to shoot for. You know, I want, you know, there's a lot of, I have a picture where the clownfish is basically cleaning out an anemone and spitting whatever the anemone has, like, you know, whatever its waste is in there at the time, it's spitting it away from the anemone. Well, I have the picture where, you know, his mouth is like wide open and the food or whatever is right here, and he's like right in the anemone. It's just shots like that I like, you know. There's so many good pictures all over the internet that multiple people take that are just like fabulous, you know. But you just make it special to you, you know. That's what I always try to do, because I know, like, when I take a picture and I bring it into the software and I look at it, I'm like, man, that is so cool. It's like, it's great. I love it, you know. And that's what you should try to capture when you get in front of your tank, you know. You know what you love. You went out to the store, you babied it, you brought it home, you took care of it, and it's almost like watching your children grow up. You know, it's those stepping stones, and it's so much fun if you're new to the reefing hobby, is to take a picture from day one and like do it every couple weeks, because it's a riot. You know, to see like a pile of rocks and then to see like a full-blown where you're at, you know, in 6 months, it's mind-boggling. And you see those stepping stones of how your coral is growing and progressing, you know, and then you get to show your friends and they can't believe it, and then they get into the hobby, and then they're looking for a line of credit from you.
I was going to say, that sounds like a perfect way to end this video, right? Again, I think it's one of those things where, to your point, it's all about an expression, right? And what's good to you. So, again, I appreciate taking the time, and let's remember I told you I wanted to plug your website a little bit about what you do. Just give me 1 minute. Tell me from a photography end of it. Well, we know it's not your day job, right? But yeah, what do you do in the photography side? One more time, the photography side of it. What made you so good at taking pictures?
I own SoManyRoads.us. It's a photography site in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I actually specialize in family portraits and infant photography. I do actually a lot of work for a local farm here as well. They have, you know, all different type of animals and stuff like that, and I do a lot of work for them. And then, you know, on my spare time, it's not really spare time, as you know, but I do have 2 reef tanks that I spend a lot of time with, and it's one of those things where, you know, it's just second nature. You know, sometimes people, they can just get into a hobby or get into something or a line of work, and they're just good at it, you know. But that doesn't mean I don't work hard at it, and the same goes for photography. You know, if you work hard at it and you have a creative mind, and you know, you can think about like the possibilities of what something can look like, you can definitely have a lot of fun with it, you know.
Well, it's funny because, you know, how this originally started, where, you know, you just sent me over that one little picture, right, of, I believe it was the clown, and I looked at him like, dude, you got skills, where did this come from, right? So,
yeah.
So to your point, right, you definitely got that gift, and hopefully, you know, what we can do is share some of the things you've learned along the way, and, you know, other people can learn as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if somebody, you know, has some sort of, you know, interest or desire in you coming over to, you know, do some photography work from them, like as far as the area that you can travel to, let's kind of lay that out for everybody.
My photography business is like my secondary line of work, and it's very, very demanding. I have a very crazy schedule. You know, I usually end up taking 5 to 6 appointments every weekend, and I do a lot of stuff during the week, you know, because not a lot of people are around on the weekends, you know. So, but yeah, it's good. If you're interested in you know, seeing some of my work and taking a look, it's www.somanyroads.us.
And I just have to jump in to say, you know, I'm the one that's forcing Jeff to do this because, again, he's giving us his time. And it's one of those things where he's like, nah, this I want to do it to help people out. And I'm like, yeah, that's good, but let's, you know, again, it's one of those things where it doesn't hurt to get your name out there. And if anybody has any need, desire, want, etc., feel free to check out Jeff. And I'm assuming on your website you have a contact me kind of.
Yeah, it's all laid out.
Perfect. Well, again, thanks for spending the time today. I really appreciate it. And
no problem.
you know, if anybody who's watching this, right, send him an email, go to his website, spread the word, show the love, right?